Good morning, everybody. This is Greg Wadley with CTC and Associates. I'm the Clear Roads Research Administrator, and today we are here to view the final project webinar for the project, the Clear Roads Project Emergency Operations Methodology for Extreme Winter Storm Events. Every project that Clear Roads completes near the end of the project cycle, we do conduct a webinar which is recorded and will be posted on the public-facing project page on the Clear Roads website within about a week after the completion of the webinar. One housekeeping item is that we will be muting all parties on the line, except for the presenter, of course. And so what I ask you to do is to submit any questions or comments you might have in the chat box. I will also put a message in there to everybody to remind them of that for people who join a little bit after this, the beginning of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to the principal investigator for this project, who is Jim Sullivan from the University of Vermont. Jim, it's all yours.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Looks like we've got about 16. And thanks to all the advisory committee members for this project who have helped out along the way. I don't have a very long presentation. We should get through it in 30 minutes or less, and then I think we'll have plenty of time for questions for you all. So, but I'm going to kind of broadly summarize what we did in the project, and then I'll leave some opportunity for questions afterwards. For this project, we had 5 tasks. The general idea was to approach getting a better understanding of what's out there in terms of best practices and lessons learned, and what people are doing in terms of planning for emergencies involving extreme winter storms. And the approach that we decided to take was kind of an interview-based case study approach, because we didn't expect that there would be a lot of information that we could just uncover with a straightforward literature search. So the follow-up interviews were critical to this project. So we started off, we actually reversed the order of task 1 and 2, and started with the survey. And the point of the survey, many of you maybe had responded to it or have seen it. And the point of the survey was to kind of help give us a little bit of a head start on the literature search, give us a little bit of a boost. We wanted to find out what plans are actually out there, what states are doing right now in terms of planning for extreme winter storms and emergencies. And so we thought the best way would be to start with the survey and then help the survey point us to some of the plans that were out there and some of the states that were pretty active in this area, and then opening up a more general literature search on top of that. So we initiated the survey first, followed it up with our literature search, which was really reviews of whatever plans and any planning literature that was out there. And our scope was pretty broad. We really were including states, municipalities, MPOs, anyone that we could reach through the AASHTO Snow and Ice Listserv or through our Clear Roads membership. And so we initially from the survey had responses from 18 different states who indicated that they had something written that we were going to be able to take a look at and possibly learn something from. I'll just mention that what we really wanted to get was a pretty decent response from not only our state DOTs, but also from other other levels of agencies, municipalities, MPOs, and maybe even state divisions of emergency management. So to get the sort of emergency manager perspective on things. So we kind of really tried to push to get responses from folks other than state DOTs, but in the end, that was really the main majority of our responses, and all of our eventual interviewees for the project ended up being state DOTs. So I think that probably indicated two things. One was that most of the planning and the comprehensive thinking about this topic is being done by the state DOTs, as well as the fact that I think we had a little bit of indication that the folks on the emergency management side in the different states are a little hesitant to kind of get out there and share information. They seemed a little more cautious about that, and so getting to a point where we were going to interview someone from a state division of emergency management or Homeland Security was a pretty daunting task. But we got a pretty healthy response, as you can see here, from throughout the country, from states that indicated to us that, yeah, they've got something written that we can review. And then from those survey respondents, we kind of followed up and said, okay, well, can you send us stuff, or can you point us to it, or what have you got that we can use to initiate this literature search? And we got quite a few documents from a variety of our respondents. There were some, who indicated that they had something, and in some cases it was a more general emergency response plan that didn't really specifically address winter storms. And in another case, it was just a very, very brief mention of winter storms, possibly within a larger response plan. That was really, the review was pretty negligible in terms of effort and summary, but some pretty meaty stuff from these respondents listed here, and quite a bit to start us off. And then, of course, we also supplemented that with just kind of looking out there and in the way we normally do a literature search, and trying to find out what we could find in a more open forum. And it was a good thing, because we ended up, two of our interviewees came from the open literature search. So both Georgia and Michigan had pretty comprehensive plans that showed that they had been doing a lot of thinking about this topic, and so we were happy about that. And in the case of New York and New Jersey, we had good response plans that we were pointed to by our DOT folks, and then we found additional hazard mitigation planning type plans that had some good information about extreme winter storms that we could kind of supplement our review with. So we got some additional literature from the open search and included that as well. So from the follow-ups with the 18 respondents who said they had written plans, and then from our reviews of the plans, we kind of narrowed down to a shorter list of folks who seemed like they had really done a lot of thinking and planning around this topic, and had gotten to the point where they were really putting things down on paper, and were learning some lessons and updating their plans, and really thinking it through. And that's this list here of 6 states that we followed up with and conducted more in-depth interviews to round out our case study process. We also intended to contact both Texas and New Jersey, and weren't able to line up an interview with those folks. But this group here, we felt like we got a pretty good group in terms of how much comprehensive thought had been put into the topic, how much had been put into thinking about how they respond to extreme winter storm emergencies and what kind of planning is needed for that. And a really nice spread throughout the country. We had both South Dakota and Colorado with, whose experience with extreme winter storms is as we learned, dramatically different from folks in, say, Pennsylvania and New York. And both of those regions are extremely different from the experience of our interview respondent from Georgia. So we got a neat sort of spread of just geographic spread, but also how that led to some interesting and unique experiences with preparing for winter storms based on that regionality. So we also included we talked to Denise Marco of the I-95 Corridor Coalition, because we wanted to get the perspective of how the various state coalitions might function to support emergency planning for winter storms. And so we added a more informal interview process with Denise at the I-95 Corridor Coalition to talk about some of the ways that the coalitions might also play a role, and I'll talk about that a little later. So for each of the interviews, we had two basic sets of questions. The first set was really kind of following up. So you recall most of these were folks who had responded to our initial survey, and we asked for information in the initial survey about, do you have a plan? What's included in the plan, and where does the plan sit, and things like that. And so we wanted to follow up on some of the information that we could see in the survey, but wasn't really, the survey really wasn't a forum where we could really understand all the information that the respondent had to share. So we were really following up to that initial survey. And then you'll recall for both Georgia and Michigan, they had never taken the original survey because we only found those two interviewees in the open literature search. So for those two states, the first part of the interview was really kind of doing the survey. So we kind of went through some of the questions that were in the survey and started the interview off with those questions. And then for all of our respondents, we followed that with a kind of a standardized set of questions that we designed around the traditional case study process. And the process includes defining what the issue is, formally analyzing any case data or any of the background on the topic, thinking about what alternatives you have going forward, and then kind of getting to the point where you narrow down to a solution. And so we kind of designed some specific interview questions that molded the case study process to what we were looking for here. The final part of the case study process, of course, is to make recommendations. We had an additional task for this project, Task 4, that was aimed at making recommendations. So we kind of thought of that final part of the case study process as coming up in our Task 4. And the recommendations ended up getting kind of incorporated into the final reporting and best practices documentation that we did. And then, of course, for the I-95 Corridor Coalition, the questions were different because we were really there trying to more informally understand, like, what does a coalition do? What does the I-95 coalition do to support winter storm planning? and what could it do? Is there more that it could do, and what type of a role could it play to help its member states plan for extreme winter storms? And I'll also note just briefly that go back to the list here of our interviewees, that the interview approach and the case study approach it was particularly useful in this case, and I think that was one of the lessons we learned in general about this type of project, is that we quickly got to the point where there's a very limited amount of documented plans for emergency planning for extreme winter storm events. So things got narrowed down pretty quickly, and I would say it's even a subset of these states where there's really a lot for other folks to learn. So the scope, the way the scope of the project played out, as things got really pretty narrowed down, and we could start to see, wow, there's a few states here that have really thought about this, and there's a lot of documentation, and they've got a lot of processes in place. And so, number one, it was a very manageable group to conduct interviews with. It wasn't like we had, 30 states that we had to kind of think about and pick and choose who we would interview. It was a pretty small group. There weren't a lot of states that we passed up who had done a lot, and the ones who had done a lot were very willing to talk to us. So, but in addition to that, we learned a lot in the interviews. So I think the interview-based case study approach was particularly well suited to this project, and I think that would be one of the lessons for certainly for us, and hopefully for Clear-Roads moving forward, is that when we think it's a topic like this that is not well established and well explored out in amongst our members and others, this interview-based approach is really effective and was very revealing and informative for us. So I'm not going to go in detail through the report. Contains what I think is a good kind of a balance between the actual transcripts of our interviews, which is not what we have there, but more of a summary, a kind of a question and answer summary of the interviews that were conducted. And there's a lot of great information in there. And then we kind of boiled down a lot of the information we gathered from the reviewing the plans in the literature search, and then from following up and conducting the interviews, to come up with a kind of set of recommended best practices. And the best practices were things that kind of kept, popping up in the interviews. They were things that were interviewees kind of pressed and said, this is very important. This is, something that we learned we had to do, so they all felt, and we'd hear it from multiple states and multiple interviewees that this is something you got to really think about. So these recommended best practices kind of emerged organically through the literature search and the interview process. So and they kind of fell into two general categories. The first one was just how is it's in most cases a state office of emergency management that's within the DOT. How is that group of individuals, or in some cases that one person, organized, and what do they do to carry out their role? So that was kind of an important initial recommended practice was that that there needs to be a person in that role, and in some cases it's not even a full-time. It's a single person, and it's not even a full-time person. In many cases, though, it's a full-time person, and in some cases it's several people. But having that Office of Emergency Management within the DOT is an important and critical step to this type of planning. And then a lot of the other aspects of communicating both within the DOT, between the DOT and folks like state police and the state Division of Emergency Management, and then also communicating with the public and how all of that organization and communication can be enhanced by better data sources from systems like ARWIS systems and AVL for asset tracking. So those types of organization and communication practices are pretty well established in some of the in the interviewees that we talked to, and were things that they had learned were important and that they continued to feel were important, as well as the idea that a regional coalition can help enhance all of this communication and information sharing. There are parts of the country, I know here in New England, we have multi-state collaboratives for pooling and sharing our ARWIS data. And so just as an example, you know, weather doesn't respond to state boundaries and stop and go when it gets to another state. So having multi-state cooperative information sharing and web-based resources for things like ARWIS data is an example of how that can come about. And then the other kind of group of recommendations and best practices were really on the hard written planning and side and involving planning and how we train to implement that plan, and then how we review and update the plan, keep it dynamic and be constantly reviewing it and updating it. So having a scalable RSIC operations plan is what we noted. And, you know, there were cases where the emergency operations plan for extreme winter storms was kind of a natural progression out of the state's normal snow and ice control operations. So, you know, which is a perfectly legitimate way to approach it, that this is how we do things under quote unquote normal circumstances. And then as a storm progresses and gets to the point where it's going to begin to overwhelm some of the resources in certain districts or regions, you know, we're going to prescribe when we go to what we would consider an emergency operation mode, and that can be right within the RSIC operations plan. Others kind of made it an entirely separate plan, that when an emergency is declared, we're kind of out of our normal mode and we're going into a different planning mode with a different written plan for how we operate. In most cases, particularly with our interviewees, the legal authority for restricting the use of the state's roads came up repeatedly, and it was something that for several of our interviewees, they do have that legal authority to either close roads or make adjustments to safe operating speeds, and in cooperation with the state police, they have plans around how they implement those restrictions. Other states don't have that authority, and they want it. So it was a big issue that we thought was important to note, that and that is often a mandate that has to be legislated and involves some processes that our state DOT folks have to get through in order to get to a point where they can implement those types of restrictions. But there are, you know, several states out there that have established legal authority to make those kinds of calls, and there's a well-established framework for how they've done that. So so that was an important piece. And the threat identification and the assessment was a piece that I would say was kind of more not as well covered by most of our interviewees. There's good information out there, but usually it's on the emergency management side where they think a lot about hazards and threats, and what that really means is, we're talking about what's the history of winter storms. It may be thought of as kind of common knowledge that in a place like New York State, for example, it's our northern counties up in the Syracuse and Rochester area that get all the snow, and it's a lot less frequent down in the southern parts of the New York City and Long Island area. But that's something that's good to get down formally on a map and kind of start thinking about risk, and where is the risk higher and where is it lower, and also thinking about the times of the year when those risks are higher and lower. There's certainly places I know, at least in the New England area, where storms are more likely in certain months, certain types of storms, whether it be heavier snow or different types of conditions. And so documenting both month to month and through space where those threats are and might allow you to kind of narrow down when you're in sort of a high risk, kind of a code red mode, thinking about the possibility for an emergency winter storm event. So that's really what the threat identification and assessment is about, is documenting the history of what's happened with extreme winter storms and where they've caused the most damage and when those damages have occurred, as well as kind of keeping the plan fresh, making sure it's reviewed and updated, and making sure that as you have turnover of your staff, not only in your Office of Emergency Management, but down through your districts, that those staff are trained. And for many of these, many of the interviewees spoke about the ICS incident command structure training that they have mandated and has proliferated through their agency as an important piece of that formalized training. So we also have, I felt it was important to provide in the final report for the project an actual sort of real examples. I think one of the more useful pieces I hope that will come out of this is in the final report, seeing who our interviewees were and being able to see what some of the things were that was talked about might give other states and other folks who want to develop these kinds of plans an actual point of contact that they could follow up and say, and get some help in how they think through it. But I also wanted to actually pull in some of the actual good examples that we found in some of those other written reports. Some of these were some of our interviewees, and some were others that we found really good, solid information in some of the written reports that kind of attested to the fact that this stuff is really done. I mean, I think in some sense, when you're thinking about, gosh, does it make sense to have a standard operating procedure for a conference call? And well, you get a hard example right in the appendices that's done, and it's been in place for years, and it's something that is very effective. And so you get to see some of these real examples of the things that are talked about as recommended best practices in the appendices of the final report. So some concluding observations. This is kind of not really in the area of like what were best practices, but just some observations that we made based on the whole process of conducting the interviews and taking this case study approach. that I think are interesting and might be helpful for folks as they think about going forward with establishing some more formalized planning processes for extreme winter storms and emergencies. We kind of saw this this difference in our different interviewees between what I was thinking of as a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach. There were some of our interviewees talked about how it was important to them that there was really centralized statewide mission and planning, and that folks in the individual districts and regions were all operating under a more central framework. And whereas there were other interviewees and states where the approach was more, things are handled on a district or a regional basis, and if an individual district doesn't reach out, and make the call that they need help, then no one's gonna force them or have them do anything different. They're gonna just be able to handle whatever challenges they have. So, and it wasn't the case that one of these approaches seemed to be working and another one didn't. It was really just a very different thinking about how to approach these issues, and which we thought was interesting, and it related to how the type of staff that were responsible for emergencies within our DOTs. There were certain interviewees who kind of got into this role through a background in DOT operations and maintenance, and kind of moved, knowing the operations and maintenance realm, moved into a position where they were also responsible for emergency management and how those operations and maintenance crews are deployed. Whereas there are also other staff in these offices and in our interviewees whose background was in emergency management. They really didn't have a long background in transportation at a DOT at all, but they were working at a DOT now, but had come over from, in most cases, the state's Division of Emergency Management. So that was interesting, and it tended to be the folks with a background in emergency operations who thought more in a top-down way, and the folks with the background in DOT operations and maintenance who thought more in a bottom-up way, which I thought was interesting, because I think in a lot of states we're not only talking about establishing and coming up with some kinds of written plans or written procedures that hopefully these best practices will help you with, but in many cases folks are going to be staffing these positions for the first time. I know here in Vermont, our state DOT just hired what I think is our first emergency management director within the DOT, and it's someone we all have known and have worked with for a while, and he came over from our state Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. So I think that's something that I would expect would be one of the takeaways here, is that you have to have that office established first, and then you can start to develop some procedures and plans. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
All right, thanks, Jim. Let's see here. We have one question from Tom Renninger up in Alaska, and he says, I thought I had heard something about ICS. Did the researchers get a feel for what ICS courses, get a feel of what ICS courses that most states put their folks through for emergency operations?
I don't want to misspeak in that sense. I think I know that in Pennsylvania that John talked about regarding the ICS training pretty valuable, and how they were starting to implement the ICS training with DOT staff, which sounded like an exciting development. But I think I would misspeak if I quoted that everyone does the 100 level or the 200 level, or what that, I don't know, maybe John can, I don't know if John can follow up on that, but it might be good to follow up with John from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to unmute John, but I think it just sent him in a way to log in. But for now,
there's more information in the report too. I would check the report, and I think that some of that information might be in there, but I don't know it offhand.
For now, though, until if John is able to join us, that'd be great. But if not, we're just going to go ahead and keep moving forward. We do have another question from Clay Adams from Kansas. He asks, are there copies of plans from the states that you interviewed?
Yes, they're all available, and they're some of them are not freely available online, but we provide the exhaustive kind of reference information in the report, and I wouldn't think that any of our interviewees or any of our best examples would be at all hesitant to share those with you. I can't speak for them, but they weren't hesitant to share them with me, and they weren't hesitant to share their interview content either. So I think it's, the point is to share as much of the written information as we can, so that other folks can start getting along and learn from what these states have done.
Okay, so John Fleming said that he was going to send the matrix, and so maybe I can forward that out to the rest of the group after the webinar.
Thanks, John.
All right, while we wait for any other potential questions, I just want to say that we will be, as I said, we're recording this right now, and then probably next week I'll have the webinar posted on the project page. The final report has been approved. It's currently being formatted into a ClearRoads style, and the project brief, all research projects have a brief as well, a 2-page research summary. We're working on getting that completed as well, and it is almost done. I have reviewed the first draft of that, I think. So I think probably by next week, by the end of next week, we'll have everything up, and I'll send an email out to the ClearRoads Technical Advisory Committee as well as Snow and Ice Listserv, letting them making them aware that all the deliverables are posted and the project's complete. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and Jim for the outstanding job you did on this project. We really do appreciate it. And like I said, we will have everything posted up on our website before too long. And with that, I will say that I think we've got everything we need for this project. It is complete. And again, thank you for everybody for joining in today.
Great.
Okay, thanks.